In the interests of making the learning of animation and slide styles as easy as we can, I want to start by suggesting we make some changes to the preferences and the settings of PicturesToExe. One of our first priorities is to make sure that you and I are singing from the same hymn book when it comes to what we're seeing displayed to us on screen. Let's start with the slide duration. We can see the slide duration shown to us on the bottom right corner of every slide when we drag it down into the slide list. And currently you can see that is 5 seconds. Of course, that 5 seconds is made up of 3 seconds on screen and the 2-second fade, which we can see at the top left of the thumbnail. So here I have an image which has a 5-second slide duration, and yet when I select it and open the objects and animation screen, we can see the keyframe that marks the start of when this image appears on screen is at the 15-second point, and when it would leave the screen is at the 22-second point, and if we subtract the 2, we're left with a slide time of 7 seconds. Why the difference between 5 and 7? It may be a bit easier to explain with a screen grab of the timeline in PicturesToExe. If you look at this image, for example, it's got the 5 seconds default we've just been looking at. But you can see that PicturesToExe measures from when the image first appears on screen to when the next one first starts to appear on screen. But of course we will still be seeing this image right the way through that particular fade. In this case it's 2 seconds, but it could be 22 seconds, and we'd still be seeing parts of that image. Within the preferences of PicturesToExe, we can change the slide duration so that it reflects the time you can see here. It records the time from the moment this image appears on screen to the moment the image is removed from screen by the next transition on. And you can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's the default duration, but we're going to add the duration time of the next image. So we need to make a change to our preferences. Coming back into PicturesToExe, we need to go to the top left of the screen to the settings, choose Preferences and Project. We need to tick this box, Show Full Slide Duration, and also this one to keep full slide duration, and OK. And immediately you'll see the value change on the thumbnail in the slide list, 7 seconds. And of course when we select one of these and we open the objects and animation screen, we can see that it starts at the 22nd point into our slideshow, and it ends, if I put a keyframe in there with the insert key, at 27. So now the objects and animation screen timeline reflects 7 seconds, which is exactly what we see on the front of the slide in the slide list. So let me close down the objects and animation screen for a moment. Let's just look at this image in the timeline, and there we can see we've got the starting point at 20. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that's the default we've just removed, and we've added the transition of the next slide on screen. But of course in the making of a slideshow, it's not unusual to move slides about, and it's not unusual to increase the transition too. So now when we go back to this image, if I go back to the slide list, now my slide duration is 20.05, and if I open up the objects and animation screen, 20 to 40.05, the two reflect each other. Coming back to the main PicturesToExe screen, let's consider the balloon shot here. We know it's 7 seconds in duration, And when we open up this image into the Objects and Animation screen, the timeline reflects that entire 7 seconds. It would be much easier for our animation if the keyframes reflected 0 to 7 seconds, or whatever time this particular image was on screen, and we can change that too. Because when I open this up into the Objects and Animation screen, I don't see 0 here, and if we were 20 or 30 images into a slideshow, we could see 2 or 3 minutes shown there. What I'd like to do is to measure every single image between 0 and whatever slide time I decide to give the image. And the way we do that is with the Tools button just below right. When we look into the tools here, we can see that by default we're showing the global times of keyframes, which is what I was explaining a few moments ago. So we're recording the time from the very first start of our slideshow. If we untick this, then now the keyframes reflect the 7 seconds that we can see on the front of the image. If I were to close this down for a moment and go to the timeline, during the making of my slideshow, once again I may decide to put a bigger gap between this image and this one. When I go back in here and I go to my slides, there I can see 12.05. When I go to the Objects and Animation screen, I can see 12.05. Everything we're looking at now, before we begin to start animating any images, is universal. We're also going to need to use our keyframe time, but I brought you back into the main screen just for a moment because I want to put a round figure in here. Let's just adjust this to be different to all of the others. Let's just say that this slide duration has been increased to 10 seconds. We know that because we can see it, and we've just applied that value. If we look at the same image in the timeline, not that we need to count the seconds, but we'll do so just to make sure, we've got 1, 2 seconds when the image is fading on, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 2 when it's fading off to give us our 10. On top of that, if we select this image and open the Objects and Animation screen, and I hit the Insert button to insert a keyframe at the end, we can see that same 10 seconds applied there too. But if I go to my Animation tab at the top right of the screen, there I've got the same 10 seconds in my keyframe time. So if I wanted something to happen with this image from, let's say, 0 seconds to 4 seconds, I can move that keyframe. One of the ways I can do it is just by putting 4000 in there, and the keyframe moves. Everything that we've got now relates to the same way of recording keyframe time and slide duration. I think it's going to make animation a lot easier to follow. Now, I'm not sure we need to say too much more about what we've done so far. Sufficient to say that to record the slide time, including that final fade off the screen, is important. Because if you look at this hot air balloon, you can see as I move that slider very, very slowly, I am a fraction of a second from the end, and yet we can still see a hint of the balloons in the mini player. So measuring and viewing our slide time from the fade on plus time on screen plus fade off is going to help us with our animation. And it's also important if we ever think about bringing video into our slideshow. One last change I'm going to suggest is the scaling of keyframes, or in actual fact, not scaling of keyframes. Most animation has some degree of plan to it. So if we make an animation that works well, and then we increase the gap between the image we've animated and the next one, then the keyframes will be scaled. They're going to be moved in proportion to how much we move the image. Now, the scaling of keyframes doesn't work for me at all. for the style of animation that I generally create. So I'm going to suggest we make a change there too. We need to go back to the settings, same place as before actually, preferences and the project, and there's the little box that we need to untick. So when we put a keyframe 4 seconds into this image and then another one at 8 seconds into this image, and then decide, because the music determines it, we need to move that image quite a distance away, the keyframes remain where we placed them.